Greetings. It's Howard here. It is Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time here in rather sunny, wonderful New York City. So, hello, world. This is our first ever live stream. Weirdly nervous because usually we do these things kind of live with humans and we know who they are and what's going on, but actually we're kind of in the studio without being able to see or connect with anyone, which is kind of weird and a little bit disconcerting. So if you're here, welcome along. I don't even know if this is working. I can't even check. We've got a team of just me rolling today. So we will see. Hopefully this is streaming on like a bunch of different platforms, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, even Twitter, perhaps. Anywho, let's get into it. This is Wavetable live. It is the 20th of October, 2021. My name is Howard. I'm in your intrepid host for the next, 20-ish minutes or so. We'll see how we get on. Why are we doing this? What's going on? Well, in these sessions, we're going to try and cover two things. The first one is how to craft and share more compelling stories to build your business, build your projects, build your career, build your community. Storytelling, it's magical. It is a skill set that a lot of people are seeking to improve. And so we hopefully through these sessions will help you improve your storytelling flex. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to get into is how you can design and deliver more engaging workshops, conferences, courses, really any human interaction, any kind of interpersonal stuff you are doing where there's humans involved, people involved. We'll try and help you design and deliver more engaging ways to do that for the people that you want to serve. That's it. Simple. Going to get into some stories. Going to talk about experiences. We welcome questions. We welcome chat. We welcome all that good stuff. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows who's watching? We'll find out. We're going to be doing these every 2 weeks on a Wednesday, 12 o'clock Eastern time. That's 5 o'clock in the UK, 6 o'clock in Europe, 9 o'clock on the Pacific coast, and around 2 in the morning if you're in Australia. I'm sorry. Anywho, stories and experiences. That's the theme of these sessions. 25 minutes, 20 minutes or so, bite size, little bit for you to get into during your Wednesday. Let's do a quick bit on who the hell we are, because you've probably got no idea. Wavetable is a company that creates unique experiences rooted in learning, discovery, and community. We kind of could be called an education company, but education feels often like something that's done to you, which is not really particularly enjoyable. We've probably all had horrible education experiences where we've been forced things on us. Instead, we want to create discovery, learning, excitement, something you want to dive into, all rooted in community. We do two things really, how conversations start with us and our work. If people are looking to do internal stuff, sorry, this is a real live stream. That is indeed a fire engine outside my window. If people are looking to do internal stuff, they're asking us questions like, how do we deliver better online events? Let's go full screen. How do we build better skills and capabilities in our team? What can we do to energize and engage people? I mean, this is a whole massive thing, especially right now. And how do we onboard and upskill talent more effectively? There's a big talent dearth right now. If you're bringing in more people to your team, how do you get them involved? How do you make them feel good? How do you integrate them into the team? How do you make them feel seen? All that good stuff. We help people do all of these things. That's what we do internally for employees and for teams. For external stuff, if you are seeking to connect with fans, communities, customers, people ask us, where can we provide more value? How do we create more compelling stories? That sounds familiar. What can we do to elevate our brand? How do we create valuable initiatives for communities? These are questions we get asked a lot. These are questions we seek to answer. We do it through a load of different ways. We do offsites, we do retreats, we do summits, conferences, we create workshops, we build community programs, we do podcasting, we do live streaming like this. I'm going to get my noggin back to full size. Yeesh, there we go. Just to show you a few of the ways we do that. One good way of explaining this is maybe through our inspirations, the things we're inspired by. A bunch of really super interesting people and things. We're inspired by things like Maria Montessori and her groundbreaking education experiences and approach. We're inspired by Christopher Nolan and his filmmaking, hip hop. We're inspired by Lego, who isn't. We love Maya Angelou's ability to change the status quo, to use storytelling to really compel people to make change. We love Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, Priya Parker, Anthony Bourdain, of course, and the wonderful Seymour Papert, who brought the idea of constructionism into education. really into that. It's one of the things we use in a lot of our programs. All right, that's the cheesy sales pitch over. You don't want to hear any more of that junk. Let's get into something more juicy, the real bit of today's sesh. All right, today we're going to get into two things today. We're going to talk about this concept of hot and cool. That's today's little sort of riff, today's little opening gambit, hot and cool. And then we have a question from our community. We sent an email out a couple of weeks ago saying we were going to start doing this, got a bunch of responses, and we're going to get into one of the questions that somebody asked around this topic. Okay. First, hot and cool. Hot and cool. It is about lunchtime where I am, so I'm starting to think about whether I want something hot or whether I want something cool for my lunch. At the moment, I've just had a sort of blackberry scone thing that was all right. Wasn't great, but hey, I've got to eat. But hot and cool is not relating to lunch in this context. Hot and cool in this context is relating to this guy. This is Marshall McLuhan, who was a bit of a thought leader, as they would maybe not say back in the 60s, because that term didn't really exist. But he probably was a thought leader. Author, broadcaster, sly wit indeed. He talked about the medium and the message. You probably know that quote. But something else McLuhan talked about was the idea of hot and cool. More specifically, hot and cool media. Now, why are we getting into this in today's little live stream? Well, this is interesting because if you're creating stories, if you're creating experiences, if you're producing something for people to become part of or get involved in, or you're trying to communicate in some way, understanding this concept can be really, really powerful. So McLuhan coined this idea of hot and cool media. What did he mean? Hot first. So hot media engages one sense completely. However, it's restricted to the time and the place. So a good example of hot media is, say, a movie. A movie kind of engages us fully, particularly visually, arguably through audio too, but it's a very visual medium. We're fully engaged with a great film, but we're very restricted to the time and the place, particularly if we're in the cinema. We're very much there right now in the moment. So that's wonderful in many ways because we can be fully immersed, but we're very restricted by the fact that there's just a film playing through a projector and we are watching that screen. There's not much else we can really do. Definitely shouldn't be fiddling with our phones in the movie theater. There's not much else we can do. That's what hot media is. It's very, very engaging, very, very immersive, but it is also quite restricted. Remember, McLuhan came up with this in the 60s. So this is kind of an old concept, but it still hits home even now, especially with the amount of different mediums and formats we are now subjected to or able to work from. So that's hot media. The second one is cool media. Cool media, it's a bit more low def. It's engaging several senses, maybe less completely. So an example might be comic books, for example. Comic books have got a kind of visual part to them where we can just see what's going on, but they've got text, we can read them. Maybe we're slightly less involved in them. We might be sort of browsing them while doing something else. We could be sitting on the train or a commute. We could easily sort of check in and out. We can pause. We can choose when we want to re-engage with the comic book, for example. Whereas with a movie, we can't really sort of check out halfway through. We can't ask the projectionist to pause the film while we go out and come back or do something else. Whereas the comic book, of course, slightly less engaged, slightly less immersed from a sensory perspective. But the thing about cool media is that it encourages more exploration and more co-creation. And especially as we look at mediums now that are available to us, we can use cool media in lots of interesting ways to encourage other people to engage and collaborate on things. And so going from McLuhan's idea when there was just kind of film, radio, books, and not that much else, we've now got everything from whiteboards to AR to VR to all kinds of other interesting stuff, not to mention Zoom, of course. This medium, as you may have guessed, is slightly more hot than cool, trying to add a little bit more coolness to it with a chat function and some other stuff. And we're also going to be inviting some guests and maybe even there's some hands-on bits in future editions. So watch this space. So we're almost moving this session, very meta, from a hot media over to a cool media. We're starting hot, we're going to become cool. So hopefully this is a helpful little riff to help you think about stuff that you're doing in your work. What kind of media are you needing to create? And this brings up a few simple questions. The what, the when, the why, and the how. So like, what are you doing that needs this kind of media? What needs hot? What needs cool? When are you doing it? When are you placing it in front of people? When do you want people to engage something that's hot, that's very immersive? When do you want people to engage with something that's cool, where maybe it's less immersed, but there's more space for them to play? Of course, we want to always ask the question of why. Why are we using hot? Why are we using cool? Why now? And then the final question is the how. How are we going to utilize it? What is the context? What is the content? How are we going to utilize it? What technologies are we going to use? How are we going to deliver it? All those good questions. So this is just a really quick little riff for today's first little live session on hot and cool. We're going to come back to that next time, I think. And we may have some questions on it that we will get into next time. All right. So thank you, Marshall. Much appreciated. Just want to bid you farewell. Thank you once again for your kind, generous thoughts. And also, I really would like to get a press photo of my own sitting in that kind of slightly smoldering looking turtleneck and deep gaze with 2 telephones on the wall behind me. I'll try and arrange that for next time. All right. That was the quick riff of today's session. So next bit, the second bit, it's only 2 bits. We've got 2 bits. Hot and cool was bit 1. That was like 4 minutes. Bit 2, Q&A. Super simple, super easy. It's a 15, 20-minute session today. I don't know. We might go longer. Who knows? I don't even know. We'll see what's going on. Let's get into it. Q&A. Q&A, question and answer. This was a question from one of our community. We sent an email out about a week and a bit ago about this, saying we're going to launch a live stream. We would like to answer questions. Also, would you like to appear as a guest? If you'd like to appear as a guest, you can contact us using the usual mediums. But the question we got this time that we've selected, we had a bunch of questions. This one is the question for today. Let's take a look. How do I find the balance between natural and in the flow versus a rehearsed TED Talk style, especially for those of us who hate role-playing and rehearsals make us feel self-conscious? Let's take that question one more time. It's a great question. How do I find the balance between being natural and in the flow versus a rehearsed TED Talk style? Maybe most importantly, especially for those of us who hate role-playing and rehearsals make us feel self-conscious. Before we get into an answer on this one, I think it's worth unpacking because I think this is a really important, valuable question. So how do I find the balance between being natural and in the flow? So we want to be natural when we're talking to people. This is relating to like facilitation or storytelling or any kind of public speaking, really. How do I find the balance between being natural in the flow versus being rehearsed? So if we don't feel that we're able to do role playing, as it were, to take on a persona, and rehearsals in front of people make us feel kind of weird, how do we find this balance? Probably you can think of talks that you've seen that are kind of those rehearsed TED Talk style, where they seem really natural, but they've obviously been rehearsed loads and loads of times. And getting to that point where you can't really tell the difference, it's really, really difficult. It can feel very unattainable and impossible almost. And actually part of what we're about at Wavetable is we like to instill a sense of possibility. We don't want it to feel like it's impossible or inaccessible or only for those gods and incredible people that just seem to be magical beings. Instead, we want to instill a sense of possibility. So this is why I love this question. How do we find this balance between being natural versus rehearsed? Okay, so a few ideas around this. So firstly is making a choice. Do you want to be natural in the flow, or do you want to be rehearsed? If you want to rehearse, then rehearse. I think this sounds silly, but I think it's important to think about that. If you really want it to be super, super tight and for nothing to go wrong and for it just to be one-way traffic, again, going back to McLuhan with the hot media, if you want it to be hot media where you're fully engaged, everyone's fully engaged, and it's just they're almost being not quite subjected to, but they are audience to what's going on, then you probably do want to rehearse. So it's almost worth thinking about this hot and cool thing first. You probably do want to rehearse. And then off the back of that, you can find some sort of natural groove afterwards. But the rehearsing bit is probably going to be important because you're going to want to get it down. However, if you're trying to find the balance, or you want to feel more natural and in the flow, but you also don't want to completely freestyle it, what can you do? Especially when you hate role playing and especially when you hate rehearsals. So here's a couple of ideas of how we can get past this challenge. It's definitely a real point of tension. We hear this from a lot of people. So first place I want to go is I'm going to just shrink myself down. So here's a bit more. Here's a bit more of the stage. This is Sir Ken Robinson, the late, great Sir Ken Robinson, an amazing educator, storyteller. His TED Talk is well worth watching on the future of education. One of Ken's many bits that we love is this one. When he taught, this is about his TED Talk, actually. So ironically, we're talking about a rehearsed TED Talk. But how he thinks about things are 5 pieces. 5 pieces to any talk that he does. Bookended by an intro and a conclusion, and there's a set, 3 parts in the middle with a set of premises. So really, it's a story. There's an intro, there's a conclusion, and then there's 3 parts in the middle. Now, the reason that I shared this is you don't need to rehearse every single piece. Instead, if you just know that you've got an introductory bit, and here's something you want to talk about, here's a conclusion bit with something you want to share, and at least you know there's a 3-part, there's 3 topics or 3 sections or 3 things that you feel strongly about or want to talk about or want to share or want to encourage others to do. This can be a really great way to start. So if you have nothing else, you can at least check in with yourself halfway through to think, okay, have I covered part 1? Where are we? Am I nearly at part 2? Have I got enough time for part 3? Am I going to get to the conclusion in time? And so on. So this is one really easy way of getting started. Thinking about how do I find the balance between being in the flow and overly rehearsed. Create a simple structure where you kind of roughly know where you are at all times, but it's not so rigorous or role played or rehearsed where it feels kind of contrived. So that's one thought. Another thought of how you can feel natural in the flow. Use visual aids. This session uses a lot of visual aids. I like to use visuals wherever I can. Here's a visual that I used in a workshop that I ran at CMX Summit about 6 weeks ago. This was relating to England's rather horrible defeat in the Euro 2020 final. The point in question was around tension when it comes to telling stories. There was definitely tension in that story with England losing to Italy on penalties. Makes me feel kind of a little bit upset even thinking about it now. But the point in this context is using visual aids. So if you're trying to find the balance between being natural in the flow versus being rehearsed, I find that images can be a really great jump off point. So rather than rehearsing everything, just use a few visuals throughout the thing, whether it's the workshop, the meeting, the course, the talk, whatever. Use images as a jump off point. Images are really powerful. There's a reason someone said images are worth 1,000 words. This image will instill some sort of emotion. It'll create some sort of shift in people just by seeing it. And I've just added one word there, tension. Instantly, people are going to be starting to think about stuff, and so will you. So this can be a really great way just to get yourself kind of moving towards conversation, get yourself in the groove, but also it gives you an anchor. So you don't feel that you're too rehearsed, because this slide, this image should remind you of the point. The point was tension in storytelling. That gives me something I can talk about. I can riff about the England game. I can then maybe invite other people to talk about tension they've experienced or other football games they may have watched. So this gives it this kind of flowing feeling without it feeling too rehearsed and without taking on a role-playing thing. And even better, if you can make the images pertinent to you, something from your own experience. Even better if you can make it something universally applicable, something that other people can relate to. Now, not everyone's into football, but most people understand the concept of a penalty shootout in a football or soccer game. They can at least relate to the tension at the end of the game. They know what the Euro Championship is. They've heard of the World Cup, whatever it would be. There's probably something here people can gravitate to. So using images as a jump off point is another great way we can find that balance. Let's just go back to our question one more time to refresh our memories. How do I find the balance between being natural in the flow versus rehearsed TED Talk style? So we've got the Ken Robinson, where we've got the few parts, 5 parts, and we can just use those as a guiding point for where we are in our thing. We've got images we can use to jump off from, and we can use images that are relatable for us and ideally our audience to give ourselves a natural feeling, gives us conversational. We can start telling a story around where I was when I was watching the game, for example. That may give us a bit more of a natural flowing feeling, maybe invite others in too. Those are 2 things. Going to do 2 more before we wrap up for today. All right. The third one is transitions. So when we are in the flow, facilitating a thing, when we are doing a talk, when we are doing public speaking of some sort, having some transitions is really helpful. They were going to be transitioning between different topics. I have found that knowing the transitions is sometimes even more important than the content itself. Now, this sounds a bit weird. How is knowing the transition more important than the content itself? Surely the content matters most. The transitions, if they feel clunky, can feel really noticeable for an audience. Whereas if they're very smooth, people kind of go into a kind of milk and cookies land or a kind of flow state or in the flow state themselves, and they'll go with you wherever we're going. Also, if we're going with a kind of cool media approach where we've got more conversation going on and we've got more openness and more engagement, that content has got more richness to it, more groove, it's got a bit more flow, and we don't need to be so concerned about us kind of dictating stuff. Instead, if we focus on the transitions, how do we get from this to the next thing? That can really help with us feeling in the flow. So if you sort of rehearse your transitional bits more than your content bits, it sounds very counterintuitive, but if you can rehearse and remember the transitions, how do we get from Ken Robinson to the football thing? How do we get from hot and cool to the Q&A? How do we get from A to B? If you can have that down and in your mind, that can be a really powerful way to feel like you're still in the flow, make it feel natural, but also you've got these nice bridging points between stories, between sections, between bits of your session, between topics, whatever it is. So this can be a really nice way of feeling that there is a bit of naturalness, that you are in the flow, but also you've got this kind of rigor and structure that you need. So rehearse and remember the transitions. I've always found when I'm doing like longer sessions where there's a lot of content, I find that, again, using a visual aid to help with the transition, I might just stick a visual up to help me transition from one thing to the next. And I can riff off the back of that image to transition us from here's the thing we just did into here's what we're doing now. That can feel like a really nice facilitated flow for people. And we can help them come with us on a journey from one topic to another rather than it feeling like we've stopped here, now we're doing something else. That can feel quite jarring. So the transitional bit can actually be quite a magical little secret weapon when it comes to us delivering any kind of session or engaging thing. All right, last bit on this before I shut up and let you go wherever you are in the world is this. Multiple routes. So multiple routes, what do I mean by this? To help you feel more natural in the flow, I find that having a couple of routes or 3 routes available for each section or each topic or each thing that you're getting into can be really helpful. Now, again, this gets to a slightly pre-planned or rehearsed approach. But if you've got a couple of ideas of where this conversation could go, what topic we might end up exploring through this exercise, what outcomes we might talk about, what questions may come up, a couple of examples that we might need. If example 1 doesn't work, is there another one we can use? By having multiple routes in and out and through topics, and that's called, if we call a topic maybe a section or a segment of the overall thing that you're doing. So for example, in a 1-hour workshop or a talk or a meeting, you might have 3 or 4 sort of 15-minute, 20-minute bits. And so let's call that a topic or a segment. If you've got an idea of multiple routes through that, around it, where it could go, where it could kind of jet off into other places, that can be really helpful. It will help you feel kind of in the flow and in control, but you're not going to feel like it's too rigid and rehearsed. So you've got an idea in the back of your head of, okay, this topic might end up going over here, or here's an example I can pull out to maybe augment or add to the conversation that's been going on. Now, you're not going to use all the multiple routes, so some of this stuff is going to be extra that you don't need, but having this plan in advance can be really, really helpful. And it's not feel too contrived, too rigid, too forced. So those are 4 things we can do. Number 1, let's go back just to whiz through them again. Number 1, you've got Ken's 5 pieces. Intro, conclusion, 3 things. Just knowing where you are within those 3 can give you like a sense of, you can practice that bit and remember where you are through that flow, but no more than that. So then you've got that kind of natural feeling. Secondly, we can use images. Images can help us jump from place to place, remind us where we are. Also, they're a great way to instigate conversation. We can move from hot to cool by having our images. Number 3 was transitions, remembering the transitions. How do we transition from one thing to another? Actually remembering the transitions more than trying to rehearse all the stuff. can actually be really powerful. And fourthly, having multiple routes, multiple options, multiple ways this bit could go gives you freedom. Maybe just on the day, you're going to think, you know what, the thing that I was going to do, plan A, I think I might go plan B. I think that feels more appropriate for how I'm feeling today or how the group are or just the vibe, whatever's going on. So those are our 4 options, 4 solutions to this question. How do I find the balance between being natural and in the flow versus a rehearsed TED Talk style? Especially for those of us who hate role playing and rehearsals make us feel self-conscious. There's a load more I could do on this, but those are 4 quickies for today. It is now 25 past the hour. We don't want these to roll on too long. So that's it for this edition. This is number 1. Thanks for joining. Please feel free to get in touch with us with any ideas, questions, suggestions. If you want to be a guest, if you've got a question that you want us to talk about, anything at all, just give us a holler. That's my email address. It's howard@wavetable.net. I'm going to try and fix up my green screen next time because I've got a little bit too much light on my face, but hopefully you will let me off this time because it's our first rodeo. All right. It's 12:26, 26 minutes and 8 seconds. It's time to go. Thanks for joining. See you next time. Bye-bye.